recording. All right, so to begin the grand finals of MNIDC 2023, on the motion, this house regrets the narrative of difficulties in life, for example, personal conditions, financial circumstance, relationship problems being a test of God. I would like to call upon the Prime Minister to begin the debate. Here.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Done? Okay, awesome. First off, congratulations to everyone making it this far. Really hope for a good debate, yeah? And yeah, POI is in the chat, and please verbally interject me because I don't think I'll be looking at the chat. So I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panel, there's this saying, right? Sometimes when you wonder why you can't hear God's voice, remember the teacher is always quiet during the test. I find this really problematic on so many levels. Why? Let me give you my counterfactual first to why we as government don't believe that this narrative should actually be dominant or even exist in the first place. So we believe that religion itself should be a benevolent thing, and we believe in a God, we believe in God. We understand that the problems that humans are facing, but we don't tie these problems or these negativity as a punishment from God. So that is where governments stand in this debate today. So a bit of piece framing here, right? So what is religion? Religion is something that gives you hope, something that gives you something to look forward to. So religion in and of itself is not problematic. So problem then arises is when people interpret religion as interpret bad things that happen to you as some test of God or some punishment, retribution coming from God. Why is this bad? This leads to people thinking they feel worthless. They feel like, oh, God made me this way, or God put me in this situation because he don't love me. Or even so, he's testing me for something that I can't even control in the first place. So it's very problematic on so many levels, panel. So what is our burden of proof here today as government team, right? So we'll prove to you why this narrative brings a lot more harm than good. So going into my arguments, why we don't want to tie this negativity to God or to religion in of itself. So why? Three structural reasons. So because religion is trying to instill good values in you, trying to give people hope. This is what Jesus, or this is what Allah is trying to do to you, to help you fight your way out of situations that's difficult for you. But they're not telling you, oh, you're in this mess is because God is testing you. Why is this bad? Telling people that it's a test coming from God. It's because they try to fight themselves out of this. 2 structural reasons why this is bad, all right? This negativity would only manifest in the person, which will cause them to overthink. How does this look like? Someone being paralyzed or something, thinking that God has punished them for something that they can't even control. It's either they're born with that situation or just something happened to them that wasn't even planned out in the first place. They never wanted that to happen, but they think that God is testing them because it's God's test. They can't do anything about this. So it's very bad. Number 2, people in really conservative places, i.e. wives in, let's say, conservative countries, or wives in let's say wives in abusive marriage, right, would consistently think that, oh, I'm being abused and this is a test from God. I have to endure. The idea that you have to continuously endure a terrible marriage, all because it's a test of God. So this is really bad on so many levels because it keeps people in this suffering, or it's not that they won't try to fight themselves out, but knowing that God is actually actively punishing you for something that you never wanted is really problematic. So they think that this is God's test. So it's you can't fight this entity because God is God, right? So people in conservative country, religion is all that's in their vocabulary. It's really something that they uphold to. So it's really problematic when you instill this kind of thinking towards these people, because it ultimately tells them, oh, God is testing you, so you should not be you have to endure because it's a test. Before I go into my arguments, yes, your POI.
Instead of debating on extremes, can you give a more plausible context of how conservative regions like uphold tests from God? Because if we're debating on extremes, then you immediately take the loose.
Okay, so like even in their best case, right? Like not extreme, like let's say financial situations, or like okay, as the motion says, personal conditions, relationship problems. Thinking just the mere idea of thinking that God is putting you through all of this like stuff when it's only humanly like worldly problems, right, is really problematic, because everything you tie towards religion is supposed to give you hope. Religion is supposed to like keep you going, or just like a motivating factor for how like you should look at life, not something that you should tie your humanly problems to. And with that, it goes beautifully into my arguments, right? So why we don't want to tie negativity to God? Let's not argue on the extreme, as they said. Let's argue on like just the middle ground, right? So why is it bad? Second reason, I already gave you a first one. Second reason is why believe it, like you believe in God, like is there for you. God loves you. The test is going to mean how God is only putting you through a test. It's really problematic when it comes to like relationships and whatnot, right? Because you think that, oh, God is like my relationship, I broke up with this person. It's because like God thinks that I can't be with this person, or like it's something that's on you and not on God. It's not a test from God. You have to stop pinning this like narrative to think like a religion, like God is putting you a test because he wants to, because he can, or like God is just punishing me for something that I never like wanted to happen in the first place. So third reason, people will constantly blame themselves for maybe like doing something that's out of their control. So what are the impacts government side can bring to you today? From our counterfactual, right, we can see that it will help you form a better relationship with God. So how does this look like? When you don't believe in the test of like some like godly test, right? People associate God as something good, something like a benevolent being that's always there for them, the light at the end of the tunnel, rather than something that's trying to push them and punish them and, you know, force them. Yeah, just a test of punishment. So this worldly entity is something that's like whole, good, and pure, something that pull you through all your problems, so people can still face problems. It's not mutually exclusive on both sides. So how we look at the problem and how we associate this with religion is something that we do better on government bench. And like for all those structural reasons, we've proved to you why this narrative brings a lot more harm than good, when it instills the idea that people can't escape this situation, or like just people have to escape this situation merely because of the fact that God is putting them through this test. Is really unjustified, and really just it's really unjustified. For all those reasons, proud to propose.
Thank you to the Prime Minister. Next up, I would like to call upon the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hi everyone, I take my POIs in chat, so if I accept you, just type out the whole POI in the chat. If I don't take it by 5:30, then please call me out because I can get in my zone. So I'm gonna be starting in 3, 2, 1. If God gave me the test, surely he has given me the tools. We're not here to minimize the experience of others, but to promote personal growth and spiritual strengthening. The belief that difficulties in life are a test of God has positive effects, contrary to what OG might think. It can provide individuals with a sense of purpose and meaning and help them develop resilience and strength in the face of adversity. Now, let me go into my rebuttals. The first, oh my God, full of slippery slopes. Let's start with the abuse. Okay, you might say abuse is a test from God if you are a super conservative ultra. I don't know what her premise was, but okay, you're in an abusive relationship. Why is your first thought that the test must be to endure the relationship? Why can't the test be to get the courage to leave? Why can't the test be to help other women who are going through the same thing? Your thoughts are very narrow-minded, and it does not actually constitute the entirety of the world. You have seen so many women who have gone through abuse who believe in the test of God come out and say the test of God was for me to help other women. Think of it differently. Next, in our world, God is all merciful and all loving, yes, and gives us that agency to have free will. That's like the whole premise of God in every religion. But like religion and God obviously are two different things, but let's just talk about God on its own. If God is putting me, for example, in this debate, surely God has given me the intellect to be able to form decent arguments. People, okay, for example, okay, now you talk about people who blame themselves. Well, that is as simple as having low self-esteem. if you see yourself dealing with a test, surely you can study for it. Because you're like, oh, it's not a problem, it's a test. Oh, I've done tests before, I can do tests, I can just study, or I can find a way to work through it. That's what the logic we're trying to bring in here. If you have low self-esteem, okay, it's a test from God, I should go to therapy. I should heal my self-esteem issues. I can bring change. So OJ so far has not proven anything except for conflating test and punishment, which are two different things. Because a test is a test, and a punishment is for doing something wrong. All right, unfair assessment. So let's go into context. So some non-contentious facts from our side is that number one, difficulties in life are inevitable. Pain is inevitable, but like the Buddhist says, pain always happens, but suffering you can control. Number one. Number two, this debate is in a contemporary context where we face multitude of issues from whatever and wherever. The problem is when we see the idea of test of God as something that has harmful consequences or leads to, say, victim blaming or systemic issues or reducing the agency. But we strongly disagree. Our burden today is to show you that this narrative of difficulties in life being a test from God should not be regretted. Our stakeholders are individuals, including minorities, yes, we are individuals too, who have faced difficulties in life. Those who have supported religious perspective on adversities, those who question such perspective, and broader society. When you face issues, we understand it can put you in a bad place mentally. Hence, our side argues that seeing it as a test actually helps us and must not be regretted. In our world, human beings can be characterized as individuals who have the capacity to experience pain, suffering, and challenges. They also have the ability to seek solutions and grow from their experiences. Additionally, they have the potential to experience empathy and compassion for others who are going through similar struggles. Now that we have that in mind, let's go to my first argument. The narrative of difficulties in life being a test of God actually promotes personal growth and strengthens one's faith. Why do I say this? Let's go into some logical processes. First, if we believe that a person believes in God and subscribes to the idea that God tests individuals through experiences, and that these experiences can help us overcome challenges and develop resilience, which in turn give us a greater sense of purpose and meaning in the struggle, this means that the narrative of difficulties in life being a test of God promotes personal growth and strengthens one's faith. Additionally, the argument further suggests that by attributing difficult experiences to God's test, we don't see ourselves necessarily as the cause or the recipient of a punishment, rather as someone who was chosen by God to experience this purpose, to contribute, to execute this test to what we feel is what God wants us to do. And moving on from that, we can see that in psychology, there's this thing called post-traumatic growth. This is what we are trying to achieve. Trauma will happen regardless if we want it or not, but how can we grow from that? And in our world, we believe that the best way is by believing it to be a test of God. So we do not regret this idea at all in any way, shape, or form. The second argument is believing problems are a test of God actually strengthens our personal resolve. Why is this? So it is likely that the belief in difficulties being a test of God can strengthen one's resolve for one reason and one reason only. We feel that our faith and worthiness are being questioned, and hence we are more motivated to overcome these challenges. Let's look at Islam, because you mentioned the name of God in Arabic. It is believed that God tests those whom he loves, and that enduring hardships can lead to a higher spiritual rank. How does that make you want to hate yourself? God loves me. That's why he chose me. Pick me culture, I know, but moving on, by viewing it as a test of God, we are more likely to have a stronger resolve, which in turn leads to accomplishment and personal growth. Additionally, let's look at Christianity. There's this man called Job who has immense trials and tribulations, but he continues believing in God. And because of that, it becomes a motivation for everyone else. Yes, you'll face problems, but God will not give you these problems unless you are equipped with the manners of solving it. So, of course, there may be hindrances. Government later might argue that, oh, we can be so focused on test. Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to prevent people's sexuality when their narrative in God is preventing them from having gay sexual?
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. See, that is why I differentiated God and religion. God is all loving, benevolent. Well, religion gives you different teachings. I can bring you cases of Hinduism saying there's nothing wrong with being gay. Love is love, and we're all spiritual essences. I can bring you essence of Buddhism, which said the body isn't even real. So by arguing on the reality of religion and nitpicking points from each different religion to try and form an argument, you're not really helping this debate. The debate is whether or not seeing stuff as God's test is helpful or not. So let's keep that in mind, yeah? So, so far we can see that back where I was, hindrances to the argument that trying to think that everything is a test and we have to prove our faith can actually damage our mental and emotional well-being. We try to argue on the contrary, because by believing it is a test of faith, we get to give ourselves that mental clarity. Another example, let's say I want to bring up Hinduism since I brought it up already. In Hinduism, if it's a test of God, you're supposed to meditate. You're supposed to find a solution through meditation or through learning or through seeking, even in Sikhism as well. So when you think of it that way, doesn't meditation calm you down? Doesn't meditation clear your mental state? If you were to bring in religion, of course, I will put this aside. If it's just God alone, we have to recognize that yes, some things don't work for everyone, but at the same time, when we see things as tests of God, we don't see ourselves as being punished, as government mentioned, but rather we see ourselves as being selected, and we feel more connected to God or the entity above us that is pushing us to do this, who has given us the tools to solve this. And this, instead of neglecting mental and emotional well-being, actually promotes it, because we want to be better individuals to fully execute the task that God has entrusted us with. So with that, I would like to come to a conclusion by first saying two things. Number one, believing problems are tests of God strengthens resolve. And number two, believing difficulties are tests of God promotes growth and strengthens one's faith. And we do not regret this at all. Thank you.
All right, thank you to the Leader of Opposition. Next up is ZDPM.
Just to check, am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Okay, give me a minute. I'll rearrange my papers. I'll start briefly. Okay. Gender pronouns he, him. POI preference, POI preference is verbal. I would not be looking at the chat. So if you guys could just verbally interject me anywhere in between, usually I'll take a POI from the 5-minute mark. Preferably from CO for engagement. Okay, be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, you need to understand a few things, right? Like humans, there's a certain limit to amount shits that you can take on a general basis. You just keep on getting shit after shit. You keep getting beaten after beaten. I think to a certain extent, you just feel question your faith, and you just question whether or not you should even be believing in certain gods or any beliefs in general. You start to question the validity of your beliefs in general. And I think to a certain extent, when you further emphasize that it is the sole believer that you believe in that puts you in that place in the first place, is the form of which you actively question or you even deteriorate the values of religion in general. Okay, before I move on to the debate, I want to point out a few things. You need to understand, I think general understanding of LO was very dodgy, and she was very convenient with her understanding. She tried to frame out how religion and God is different, and tried to argue how being given this test is somewhat of being selected to being selected as a close believer of God or something. We tell you that to a certain extent, you can't just tell everyone that maybe to a certain extent, if a patient has cancer, that he's being selected and God loves him, right? I don't think you can tell that someone's dog got run over, and to a certain extent, you just tell them God loves you, he's giving you this test. Your dog dying to a car was a test, and you are loved by God. I think it's that point of which you try to frame the way that God loves you is by testing you, in the form of which you actively tell these individuals, okay, your suffering is not really suffering, and it's okay, and it diminishes the pain or the magnitude of pain being understandable towards others. Secondly, they also talked about how to a certain extent you can what they told you if they give you a test, they're gonna give you solutions. God has everything planned out for you. I think that's already a very problematic statement in itself, because I understand a large hood of a lot of possibilities that could happen to you. Maybe because societal structures or even just unfortunate circumstances that happen to you might not have solutions. For example, being born in the wrong birth, losing the birth lottery, there simply just isn't any explanation for that. You were just unlucky to begin with. By believing and the way to opt out of it is just working your ass, working off or something, or maybe let's say you're facing cancer, or you're facing any other forms of credit card fraud, you got fraud and everything. To a certain extent, I don't think a lot of times there's also solutions. God gives you for example, you have cancer, you might die. I don't think to a certain extent God always gives you solutions, and the narrative in which you try to actively promote that there are solutions is a point of which you actively give these people false hope, a facade of hope, and why it's very detrimental towards them in general. 3, we also tell you how it's gonna strengthen one's faith, because you suddenly are gonna be more faithful towards your God, because you just tested, you feel connected. I feel the more shit you go through, the more stuff that God puts you through in your belief of the narrative also diminishes your active belief of it. 4, they told you how actively by believing in this narrative, you'll suddenly have more capacity to seek solutions and empathize. I feel you're gonna be more complacent with your your understanding of things, because like if God was to test you was just because the test of like faith, then you would just pray more or do something else instead of actually finding the root cause of solutions, in of which the speaker before me has said, which I feel like is a very dodgy response by them, in of which empathy-wise, I feel like empathy comes from experience and whatnot of and humanistic natures. You do not necessarily have to believe in religion to empathize with people. I feel like certain altruism factors also promotes empathy, and also like just moral in general also promotes empathy. Before I move on, yes or POI?
I
POI?
think the characterization coming from your side is very unlikely, where you just assume everyone's inherently stupid and every single test is coming from God. Rather, I think people have the capacity to judge that God is not testing them based on this as a measure of love. So please clarify.
Okay, so what CO is suggesting is that they don't believe in the narrative as well. So I don't really see the point of the POI. If like you try to actively promote the POI and promote the narrative, I will assume that opposition will also want a narrative in which you opt into the narrative when you have shit goes down, because you want the best case scenario of like whatever hope they wanted to argue later. Two, like one big argument here is like how this testing or this narrative in general diminishes the impact of the marginalized society, and also like just creates a very also diminishes like the people's perspective around them towards like how serious the problem is in general. So to understand like to a certain extent, in of which like, opposition itself, the understanding of like God's test narrative is very problematic by nature, which they say when they give you something, they're gonna give you a solution, right? It's like it's very diminishing, because every time you assume that the test does have somewhat of a positive outcome, that you're gonna walk out stronger, and to a certain extent, the people around them are less likely gonna be able to like understand the deep effects or emotionally towards the actors of like the current stakeholders that are actually in the deep shit problems that are in the first place. This means to a certain extent, right, a lot of people surrounding them will always just chalk it up to, okay, maybe you're like, let's say like you're in a financial crisis. It's okay, everything's gonna be better. It's just a faith of God. Instead of like, actually trying to help you, instead of like, actually trying to like certainly like how do I say it, certainly like just talk it out with you, like give you more advices and whatnot, give you more like just like try to solve your problem with you, because now they just chalk it up as a test of God. You should go pray more, you should go do a certain stuff more, and God is punishing you for maybe something that you don't even know that you did, or like whatever. To a certain extent, it's just like just deteriorates your no, I already took one. It's just gonna deteriorate your faith in God in general. Okay, two, why is this necessarily very bad towards a marginalized society? It's to understand, like, for example, like, let's say if you're a minority born because we lost like birth lotteries and whatnot, or let's say that you are of like certain LGBTQ communities and whatnot. To a certain extent, we just subject their adversary or like the problems in which they face, right, just towards the test of God in general, and understanding like how certain extent like God is punishing you. It promotes a narrative of like it's wrong to be like born in this certain marginalized society, like, and God is actively like seeking out retributions from you for it. And this to a certain extent is gonna deteriorate the faith that you have towards a certain God in general, because now you're gonna question, does God really necessarily love me in general? Because like now he's actively punishing or seeking out retribution from me due to the fact of maybe some things that I couldn't even control in the first place and whatnot. And like those other reasons, like just giving me a shitty life in general, and like by that extent, because like if every time I get shit for it and it's because of God, I don't think after a long period of time I'm gonna still be believing in the same God in general. Okay, so what has OO tell you so far? So OO has told you like OG has told you how not having this narrative will better provide a better sense of like religion, in the sense of which you have clearer or less bad or less like negative things related to religion in general. This means that to a certain extent, you will look into more humanistic natures of like problems happening, and to a certain extent, you're going to be more able to like seek out problems, because you're not as complacent as like just chalking it up to like towards like the like test of gods and whatnot. We also told you like how to a certain extent, it also does not diminish the impact of like adversaries or problems faced by this marginalized society, as now you're not actively like also telling them that like, okay, this is a punishment from God, and somehow like some way it's also justified because it's God, you know. And with that, I've never been prouder to propose.
Thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister. Next up, I'd like to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hello, am I visible and audible?
Yes.
All right, cool. I'm taking the water break, 2 minutes to. Okay. My preferred pronouns are he, him. My preferred POI is through verbal, not through chat, because I do not entertain anything from chat. I'll begin my speech in 3. Let me time myself also. Just a timer. Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. The test of God is meant to be to test individuals on the morality and also the spiritual values. This is what the test of God actually means, and this is what been extensively said by my leader of opposition. Now, first off, I'll bring up a few rebuttals that have been stated by the government side. They've been totally misconstruing the whole, the idea of the test of God to begin with. They've been giving very niche points to begin with, like a dog dying, being rammed by a car. It's apparently the test of God, and you say this is a very bad thing. But I like to go on with the Deputy Prime Minister's whole case about how every every hardship that you face is just basically like a bad thing, right? Like, this is a very niche case. When he talks about how the dog dying rammed by a car is a very niche case. If you look at it in a very short time frame or a short perspective, it does look like a very hateful thing. But if you were to clarify this in the test of God, it's actually testing you. If you think about it, right? You neglected your dog rammed and hit by a car. Okay, if you neglected your dog so much that your dog got hit by a car, it's meant to make you feel like you are it meant to make you realize that you didn't spend love and care enough for your dog, and meant to make you be better in a sense. Oh yeah, sure.
So let's say your dog die and then you get a new dog. Does that mean God want you to get a new opportunity?
I would say so, because now you realize that you've neglected your previous dog, and now you want to make sure that you've done things right. If that's the case, right, the test of God is just meant to make you realize and also make you like what my leader of opposition state, personal growth, meaning to say that you basically develop yourself personally in a sense where you care for something else. Okay, so that's one thing. One of the ideas is that, and I want to ask Thai government, if you have talked so much about adversities and saying how test of God is being like a resentful thing, right? How does your side deal with hardships then? How does your side actually answer the whole, if my dog got hit by a car, how will I grow from this? You would feel resentful. In fact, you start blaming yourself. The idea of test of God is meant to show you that you have been is meant to show you, make you realize that you have done something wrong, and then you can correct it later on. Sorry, rejected. Next up, I'm moving on to the Prime Minister's speech. Okay, she talks about how religion is instilling good values and teaching people or instilling good values into people, right? And this is true, right? Once you ought to wonder, why am I learning all these good values in school? Like in school, you learn maths and etc., right? But you have to be evaluated somehow or rather, right? The whole self-pity idea, the idea is to if the whole self-pity mindset is basically to fail in the test. Meaning to say that you have failed the test of God. The whole idea that I have went through hardship and I should be feeling self-pity for myself is a failure of God, because you must love yourself, you must actually care for yourself, and you must use the good values that's been taught by religion and also God into recuperating yourself. That was one of the things that I think is very important and misleading for side government to talk about. Also, how she talked about how you shouldn't tie God to your negative human thoughts, right? But in the end of the day, if you really think about it, right, everyone will regardlessly tie anything or basically everything or any hardship to someone, right? And what better if it to tie to God, because God is all forgiving and all loving, right? He cares about you. That's why he puts you through this test. He wants you to grow, and that's why he puts you through this test. He wants you to make sure he wants to make sure you realize your mistakes and grow from it. That's what is better. Well, government side has not been giving anything from their stance of how they're going to recuperate from these losses. They have just been saying that, oh, it's bad because it affects religion. But it doesn't. In fact, religion is the teaching, whereas the God is the teacher. Technically, you say that, right? It's a very metaphorical thing to say. But yeah, that's how you look at things like that. Okay, so on to my new points, okay? Some points that, points of extension from my leader opposition, right? She talked about how my leader opposition talked about how personal growth, right? So I'd like to extend on that by saying that every test that you go through, right, you can either pass or fail. You can pass or fail it, right? So by passing it, you actually use the teaching of religion and also what God has been trying to teach you all along to actually pass the test. If you fail it, then technically that's self-pity, right? You don't use anything you're applying for. That means you don't apply anything that's being used by religion and also God by himself, right? So the next point I want to bring up is empathetic, right? Empathy. Well, the test of God actually brings out empathy. And this is towards the minority group of people who have been marginalized or oppressed, like what my leader of opposition stated, minority groups, okay? So believing their struggles are part of the divine plan, or basically like their struggles in life is the teaching of God, right? These can lead individuals to develop a greater sense of empathy. And why is that? We know that for a fact that the more adversities that we face, the more empathy in life we have later on. Because if you think about it, right, if I have gone through something in life, that means if I look at someone else who's gone through something in life, I would feel pity. In fact, I would, regardlessly, I would feel not only pity, but also try to help them. Yeah, and this is beneficial for especially marginalized and also oppressed groups, because we get to help one another. Whereas for their side, they're not giving any solutions. Whereas in government side, they're not giving any solutions at all. Clearly something, they're not even helping the marginalized group to begin with. That's what side government's all about. The next point I'll bring up is humility. And one of the things that, this is a very ground perspective. The reason why humility is a very important thing is that we can see people go crazy with power, right? We know that power kills, or power corrupts people, right? You can be egotistical when you achieve something that's very grandiose, right? When you achieve something in life, you feel very egotistical, you feel like you've done something in life. But when you fail, let's say you fail, or like if you don't get something in life, right, you feel resentful, you feel vengeful, and etc. Right? All these bad traits, the 7 deadly sins suddenly come out, all the lust, etc. 7 deadly sins suddenly come out, and now suddenly you become like, totally the, you fail, basically like basically like going against the teachings of God. Okay, but in this sense, right, when we bring up the test of God, it actually tests us, it actually like makes us feel that we acknowledge our limitations, our weaknesses, and seeking improvements, right? Because like the test of God is meant to actually like, how you say this? Test of God is meant to actually bring up the best value in yourself, right? It's meant to make you feel like you have improved in life, and basically use the teachings of God to better yourself, which is good, because like if you think about it, right, marginalized groups have already been like oppressed, etc. Right? So once they've come up to fame, they will always like refer back to their humble beginnings, and that's pretty good. It teaches them that I should reflect on my past and make sure that this is who I am. This was who I was, and how I came up to this power, this level of fame, right? And that's very good for marginalized people, because it gives them hope, it gives them something to dream of, right? And that is one of the two major points that I have for this debate. And I like to end my case by stating that reaffirming what our stance, our OO has been stating all along, is that we have talked about how personal growth is very important. It teaches marginalized group to be empathetic to other people. It also teaches marginalized group also to be humble towards to themselves, and also to other people as well. Whereas side government has been just misconstruing us on the whole perspective of how they'll probably resent God and everything, but it's not likely the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Deputy Leader of Opposition. That concludes the opening half of the debate. To continue to the closing half of the debate, I'd like to call upon the Member of Government.
Okay, hi. First checking, am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Okay, that's very nice. All right, I will. Okay, all right. Okay, I will begin my speech. Hold on, let me have a cup of water before I do that. Okay. Setting up my timer. Before that, POI preferences in the chat, please do not open your mic and interrupt my speech. I will take a POI around the 4th to 5th minute, but please keep it within the chat. Okay. All right. Okay. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, wait. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. The entirety of the opposition case insofar now is one that completely exists outside of the scope of this debate. But before I continue on and taking out LO completely, let me tell you very quickly what I'll be doing in my speech today. Firstly, I'll be rebutting the LO case, as well as trying to preempt a little bit of CO, and I'll be building the CG case. Okay, so first and foremost, right, why do I say that the LO is completely out of this debate? Because first and foremost, there is already tension within the cases brought forward by the first and second speaker. The Prime Minister has gone on and on and on about the separation of God from religion, which in of itself already doesn't make sense within the context of the debate. But the DPM himself has already stated, like within his speech himself, he's already likened religion to the figure of God. He has already interchangeably used these terms. So which is it? Is God related to religion, or is it not? Okay, so now just to start with the Prime Minister, right? To continue on about how like God is separated from religion. That's not how it works within this debate. If you believe in a God, you are part of a religion. That's how it is. There isn't any sort of clear separation that can necessarily come from that. So everything that the Prime Minister has talked about on that point is just, I do not understand it, and it's not necessarily relevant to this debate because it's not it's not logical or makes sense in any way, shape, or form, right? Okay, so firstly, right, they want to talk a lot about like how it promotes personal growth, about how like it's all okay. The entirety of the Elo case, insofar from what we both heard, is that their entire case is staked on them assuming what the priorities or necessarily what the intentions of this figure called God is going to be. And because it's something that's so arbitrary, because that's something that's basically impossible to prove, how can you as a person necessarily prove that you know the intentions of God, that you know that he's always going to be benevolent? We don't necessarily dispute that. We just say that that is outside the context of debate because that's something that you cannot prove. And if your entire case is predicated on the fact that you as a person are assuming the intentions of this person, not this person, or you as a person assuming the intentions of God, that is already completely outside the scope of this debate. Because frankly, what we want to debate about here today is just simply which side creates a better environment for solutions to be reached. We don't deny that on both sides, some degree of finding solutions to these individuals struggling with problems are likely to occur. It's just a matter of which side puts you in the healthiest and best environment to get those solutions, to find those solutions in the first place, first and foremost. Okay, so then this leads me to the CG case, right? Just very quickly, a little bit of recontextualization, right? What does the narrative necessarily look like, right? The narrative is something that's likely going to be the narrative of like the test of God is something that's likely going to be inherently tied to religion, i.e. like because as stated by the DPM themselves, like issues of morality are likely going to be judged based on the terms of this religion itself, right? And it's likely only going to happen within communities by which they buy into are very heavily religious in the first place. So even if CEO wants to come up here and talk about like other people who don't buy into the religion, that's not related to the motion at all. We are specifically talking about the people who buy into these narratives, who are religious in and of themselves, and how it's necessarily harmful towards them. Okay, because they're the only ones who are relevant in today's debate. So firstly, right, continuing on the CG case, there are two kinds of problems. One is the problems where it's like, let's say necessarily superficial problems like financial issues, right? And relationship problems, for example, problems that have a clear solution that can be fixed. But you also have problems on the other side, quote unquote, like morality issues, right? Problems that are quote unquote problems that are seen as problems specifically because of like, let's say like personal biases or because of personal religious biases. What am I talking about? I'm talking about for example, like the existence of an LGBTQ+ person within a conservative country, right? So these are problems that are necessarily unsolvable by any sort of metric. No amount of meditation is going to help you solve the problem of like necessarily being a gay person within a conservative country. And that in of itself isn't the problem. Being gay isn't the problem, right? But it does become a problem when you're in a conservative country and you're trying to lobby for yourself, or you're trying to come out to your parents, you're trying to tell them that, hi, I'm part of the LGBTQ+, but they wave away any sort of potential discussions that you could both have. They wave away any sort of ability for you to come to any sort of general consensus and solve this issue within the family because they see it as a test of God. They see it as something that you as a person are going to quote unquote grow out of, are going to resolve by yourself. When it's a part of who you are, it's not something that you can resolve. It's not necessarily a problem that can be done away. And that is inherently the issue with the narrative of a test of God, because it washes away, it's essentially a problem solution mismatch. It washes away any sort of like it washes away a lot of avenues for any sort of potentially good discussions to be held, because now the focus is on whether or not the focus is on the person and their relationship with God rather than the other outside factors that may necessarily be playing a part in it. Okay, so now what does this mean, right? And this also plays into a little bit of my rebuttals to what has come up from the DPM speech. When you talk about minorities, right, why do we protect minorities much more on our side? The reason why minorities are hurt in the first place is because they're the minorities. They are systematically being oppressed. They are systematically disenfranchised. And once you take the narrative away from that, from like the actual problem, POIs in the chat. And once you take the narrative away from the actual problem in of itself, what ends up happening is that instead of being able to like solve the problem in of itself, instead of actually bringing visibility to the key problem in of itself, you are placing the issue on the fact that, oh, it's a test from God. Oh, they're minorities. They're disenfranchised because God, for whatever reason, God has decided to test this individual. I'll take a POI now from opening.
I said in the chat, it says that DLO clearly said religion is a teaching and God is a teacher, not that God is religion. This is in agreement with what I said about them being
separate. Thank you for the POI. Noted. Irregardless of that, it doesn't matter. You cannot separate God from the religion in of itself when you talk about the followers of God, because that is essentially what a religion is in the first place. Okay, you cannot separate it. It does not make sense. Okay, so by and large, right, what this ends up doing is that to the individual themselves, not only is there going to be a lot of internalized guilt, because it's like, why can I not solve this problem? When it becomes problems that are quote unquote unsolvable, i.e. let's say like if you are part of the LGBTQ plus community in a community that sees it as a quote unquote problem, that's not something you can solve. That's not something with any sort of feasible reason that you would be able to solve it by. So that's why you internalize a lot of guilt. That's why you internalize that there is something wrong with me. I have to fix myself. Why can I not fix myself? What is going on? This is where the individual themselves are likely going to accrue a lot of emotional and mental harms, particularly because they're faced in a situation by which with the narrative of the test of God, it's not a solution by which they can reach. It's not a practical solution that they can put into place at all. And this also pushes the community away from them. This pushes the society around them from necessarily understanding the problems in of itself. It undermines whatever sort of structural reasons are put in place as to why these people are facing problems in the first place, especially if they're a disenfranchised minority. And all of this ultimately leads to a breakdown of any sort of proper progressive solution making in the first place, right? So the reason why we weigh over our opening half is that opening half can talk about like the harms of like your relationship with religion all they want, but ultimately we weigh out over them because we're talking about the individual and of society in of themselves, much more than just the individual and their relationship with religion in the first place. So for all those reasons, proud to propose.
Oh, sorry, I just realized I was muted. Thank you to the member of government. Next up is member of opposition.
Right, before I start, am I visible and audible?
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, so gender pronouns are neutral, they, them. POIs in the chat. If I don't take you by 5:30, then only verbalize yourself. If not, just keep it in the chat, yeah? I'll take a few moments to compose myself and then I'll start. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, understand that there is no bloody institution in this world that glorifies resilience, glorifies resistance, glorifies struggles as much as religion does, and that can only exist when you actually subscribe to the narrative of God, right? So with that statement alone, opening half ultimately loses because neither of them actually clarify what is the true characteristic that we think actually applies to this debate. Moving on, extensions on CO, right? 2, 1, understand that OG is practically cherry picking a utopian world where they think that everyone that subscribes into religion is, 1, ultimately stupid, and 2, cannot differentiate that not everything is tied to what God, whether it loves you or not. We think that rather or not, people that actually subscribe into religion actually, like I said earlier, glorifies resilience more than anything. They're not going to judge everything based on their dog dying, which is an extreme example, right? Second, understand everyone in this room prior wanted to debate on whether or not everyone is ultimately religious. We think that is factually untrue. We think that you can still subscribe into the narrative of religion and God despite being an active believer. So CG coming in and saying an absolute one-liner example about LGBTs in conservative countries only further marginalizes this group, and I'll tell exactly why this motion can still stand even if we want to debate on the extreme examples on the other side, right? Secondly, understand that within status quo, there is already an urgency that exists. Why is so? Because we think the counterfactual on their side is that when you regret the narrative, instead what happens? We argue that when you don't have the narrative, instead then you shift faults and all the entire burden of why is this happening in my life? Why is everything going wrong? Am I the problem? Or am I my family is the problem? Is my significant other the problem? Or you then try to find extreme external factors just so that you can get some form of like console within yourself, so that you know that, this person is the cause of everything going wrong. And we say that that is not a narrative that we subscribe by, and it's not a narrative where you can fulfillingly live a content life, right? Rather, I'll prove to you exactly why contentment can only exist on our side. So moving on, what is the model on site CO, right? Two models. First, understand that even though CG wants to say that benevolency is out of the debate, we think that's absolute bullshit. We think that the moment you want to argue about religion within the debate, everyone has to concede that everyone that subscribes to a religion actually acknowledges God as benevolent or not, no matter how religious you are or not. We think at some extent you still acknowledge and view this figure as benevolent. And we tell you that the presence of benevolent figure in itself is very important. Why so? Because then you actually have this figure to look up to. You actually, when you tie it to test or not test, whatnot, you actually think that this is something that you have to like be resilient to in order to prove yourself. And it's different from being a test from your mom. It's different from being a test from your dad or being a test from your boyfriend, right? Second form of framing, there is always this issue that mind over matter wins in anything, whereby in their counterfactual, they will blow things out of proportions because they focus on the materialistic things that happen one by one instead of actually winning over mind, where we think only factually exists on our side. So with that, what are the arguments on our side, right? We think before moving on to arguments, we have to understand what exactly is the burden. We think that our burden is simply to tell you that we can live a more content and fulfilling life by not shouldering the burden upon yourself. So one argument with three forms of extension. First, understand the argument mainly principally coming from OG is that overcoming challenges are better off on our side when you actually be more content and actually subscribe to things being benevolent in and of itself. So three forms of analysis. First, when you don't blame others on yourself, you acknowledge that there is ultimately nothing you can do. So this is the characteristic from the test of God wording of itself. This exists in most religions as we see. Even Islam, you see that a lot of things people just revolve with it at the end of the day. Karmic balance exists in more than one religion. So we think everyone doesn't necessarily think that, if I am failing to do something, I'm ultimately useless. We just accept it as it is, acknowledge that there is nothing we can do, acknowledge that there are certain limitations between resources, and we just move on with our life. Compared to the counterfactual that exists on their side, where then when they will continuously, you cannot deny the fact that when you are not content, when you do not have the narrative of things being benevolent, then you will try to tie the fault to someone that is not benevolent, and that is the pure factor, that is the pure cause of your misery, right? Second extension, there's a fulfillment in overcoming a challenge from God, which I briefly touched on earlier. Simply when you acknowledge that God is higher up in hierarchy than you, when you acknowledge that this being is testing you for certain things, and they wanted to argue that like, God doesn't love you, that's why because he's testing you, so on and so forth. I think more likely the argument, the characteristic that exists is that when you are being tested, when you are sick, people usually say, it's because God loves you, that's why you're sick. He wants to cleanse you of your sins, so on and so forth. We think rather or not which characterization we take, we still think that it's not a measure. People are not inherently stupid, once again, to think that everything is based on these tiny factors. Rather, people know that in everything there's not only good, there's not only bad, it exists in a balance of both. And people know that applies to religion as well. So they know that if this is a challenge and they are resilient, they come over it, that is the good that will come with it. There is some form of like benefit and reward that will come with the resilience, and that narrative can only happen on our side. So what is the trade-off that we offer? Before that POI from OO, if any, OG, sorry.
Okay, using your own words, you say that if you don't buy the narrative, you'll find other external factors that lead to your root cause of the problem. People are more inquisitive and are better at finding root causes and solutions. Why is that bad?
Why exactly is that bad? Because then you have people that you communicate on the daily and you will blame them and you will actually resent them for life. For example, let's say you didn't get a scholarship placement, you didn't get a job placement, you didn't get whatever university application. Then you will find all the external factors, and obviously understand humans will never admit their own personal facts. They will always tie other people first. They will blame other people first. They will cuss out other people first. So we think that's likely what will happen on Gov when you regret this narrative, because then you will find other these factors. You will not be complicit into acknowledging things. You will then tie, it's because I'm from a B40 family. I'm from a B40 family because my parents are broke. They didn't get the jobs that they want. They didn't study hard enough. And then that leads me down this cycle and I cannot achieve more. Rather, when you actually subscribe to the narrative, you're more content. You know that, okay, my parents tried their best. This is a test to see if I can overcome this challenge because my parents couldn't overcome the previous challenge, right? So then what is the trade-off that we offer on CO, right? We think it's obviously a closing win for two reasons. One, the characterization coming from OG itself is out of the window. Pointed out in POI twice, they didn't try to buy it. They still wanted to run a very extreme case. Second, why OO is completely out of debate. Two, they didn't contest to the intrinsic problems that existed within OG. And secondly, there's not a contextualization on what actually religion should be. There's already problematic flaws about characterization of like religion and people that subscribe into religion, and they just bought by it. And I think for that exact reason of not pointing out the flaws of OG or losers, then why are we better than CG, right? We think that at the end of the day, we tell you exactly why the content and fulfillment will only exist on our side, because then you don't try to find external factors to tie back to. So for all those reasons, CO, thank you.
All right, thank you to the closing up to the member of opposition. Now to end the debate on the side of the government, I call upon the government whip.
Hello. I am audible and visible, right? I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. So give me a few moments because it's very messy on the table. I'm gonna reorganize my stuff first. All right. So my POI preference is in chat. Please don't disturb me. If let's say in 5 minutes, almost 5 minutes 30 seconds, almost 6 like that, I haven't give you the POI, then just you can verbally asking. Right. So this is my very first grand final for Novice. Congratulations to all that having here. It was very interesting session. Sorry for the delay. All right. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, the burden in this debate is very simple. Number one, to prove that this narrative is harmful for number one, individual, number two, society as a whole. So the end goal from the closing government is to solve in the best way, i.e. in most realistic way on how we want this narrative not to be there at the very beginning of the place. The status quo in the narrative is very difficult because when we bring up the cases of LGBT, religious backgrounds like family and friends, the opposition side don't want to engage with us because they are contradicted with themselves when they say that God is not with religion and religion is different from God. But when the LO comes out and saying that God is the teacher and religion is the teaching of the God, isn't it conflicted with each other on how they mechanize those things at the very beginning? Now, people live in poverty. And then what happens afterward? You look down on them because they might fail the test of God. Because the test of God, this narrative will not have to solve you the problem. But how can we solve that? We say that it is very harmful because, number one, for individual, the reason you're suffering because God tests you. So since it is your test, the society are more likely not want to help you because it is your test and you need to solve it on your own. Op can only say it pushed you to solve the problem on yourself because most of the problem cannot be solved alone. This is the things that you need to really think. In the case of relationship and couples, when the problems need two people to solve it, you cannot say that this problem is only on one-sided because of God test you but not test the other people. Before that, let me go for a direct rebuttals on the closing opposition, right? Number one, they said that regret this narrative because it's going to shift the blame to other people. No, we say not every problem is caused by you. If you live in a poor community and struggle to get by, the cost problem is more likely to become because of how the community bring up and the upbringing of the growing of the community at the very beginning. So this doesn't work, right? So I hope that you didn't buy this case from the closing opposition. Secondly, when they talk about fulfillment and overcoming tests from God, right? So how about systemic issues, right? The test of being gay in conservative country cannot be solved on their side, right? Because number two, living in poverty, you cannot escape without systemic change because it is not same with fulfillment because fulfillment can happen and even if you solve the problem, you still cannot fulfill on our side, right? Because what in our side, we prove to you that in government side, you can solve this problem better. And even if it is okay and people don't want to accept you because of your religion, because God didn't teach you this way, it doesn't matter, right? Because you want to solve the problem now. So how you want to solve the problem. You cannot just say that this is narrative of God. You need to change your mind. You need to improve yourself because this religion or this God don't want you to be like that. You need to follow how the God lived on their life before. Before that, let's see how we deal with opening opposition case, right? Number one, when the LO saying about when God give you test, you go solve your problem, you can go for alternative peace and so on, right? So no, because if the end solution you already identify at the very beginning that you have the problem solving in the mind, so why then you understood how realistic they are, so why need to put their narrative to it? Why you want to put the narrative of or test of God, but you already have in mind at the very beginning that, oh, I know how to solve the problem at first. Secondly, when they say that test of God is going to help you and then you can seek solution, no, because their solution is not independent. It depends on whether the God can give you the way to get out or not. But in CG side, we tell you, without this narrative of God at the very beginning, you know already how to deal with your problem and how to actually get away from having the problem forever in your side. Number three, we deal with the minority or marginalized people better, right? I.e. the LGBT, because in CG side, they said that religion and following God is different. So if religion say cannot, but God say can you do that? So this teaching and teacher things from God, right? It's not make sense from their side. Very contradicting. Number four, they say that when you are tested, God chooses you, you are special. This case is uncharitable from government opposition side, right? Because if you want to buy this, number one, it means if you are tested, i.e. you are poor, then God loves you. But if you don't have problem in life, let's say you are rich, you are not special enough because you are not tested. This doesn't make sense, right? But in our side, we tell you that the logic and how you want to handle your life situation more rationally and realistically at the end of the day. Before that, right, let's see how the DLO want to deal with the government side, right? They say that when you are facing hardship, God wants to give you better opportunity in life. So if the poverty is hitting the poor people or poor community for a century, where is the opportunity from your narrative, right? Because at least in closing government, we solve the how and why or the poverty in the status quo, and we deal with it directly, not like waiting for 100 years until God gives you opportunity at the end of the day. Secondly, when they talk about struggle in life, teaching of God, you will get help and support from the minority. Even if this is true, right? You didn't tell us how it's going to help the marginalized people in status quo. Not all wording from God, i.e. in Bible or Quran, can be practically interpreted in status quo. If you want to solve the poverty by just being kind, go to pray, and this is not realistic, right? So before that, yes or
It seems to be that you guys want the answer from God only, not adversities at all.
Oh, because it is your point telling that God's answer is the way of living and the way to seek the solution. Our side, we don't need God answer. If we need you to prove the God answer at the very first place. We prove to you that without this God narrative at the very beginning, we can solve the problem better at the end of the day. So number one, how can we wear over CO, right? Number one, OG already provide necessary mechanism to prove why this hurt systemic disenfranchised minorities more, right? Number two, we provide larger societal impact. And number three, we give clear mechanism as to why one would feel guilty for failing test of God right at the very beginning. So after this, if opposition whip want to come out and tell about we give better mechanism on how this failing of test can actually help you to seek solution, that doesn't work already because we already overcome that. Or also we already overcome how we actually can solve the solution better without even waiting for the narrative of God to tell you whether or not you can implement that narrative in status quo. Now, why we over OG, right? Because why we over OG, right? Because OG already tell you how this is not good, how this can actually harm individual and so on. But we tell you a lot more mechanism on how we can or how it's gonna hurt systemic disenfranchisement at the end of the day. With that, please stay with closing government.
Thank you for the government whip for the speech. And now to end the grand finals of MNIDC 2020, the novice grand finals of MNIDC 2023, I would like to call upon the opposition whip.
Checking for audibility and visibility.
Yes, for both.
All right, thank you. Before I'd like to start, I just want to have some clarifications on these are points just for the sake of debating. These are not my personal values, nor do I feel a certain way about religion or marginalized groups, period. Right. With that being said, pronouns are he, him, POIs in the chat box. If I don't take you by 5, just verbally ask me your POI. Preferably, I'll be taking one on 5 from opening. With that being said, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. One thing that I did not realize that would be such a huge part and like the driving factor of this motion and the arguments is that God versus religion became such a huge factor, especially when you're talking about just narratives of test of difficulties in life being a test of God, right? I feel like this motion in itself is a test of God for me. Understanding that this being a major clash that's happening in the open space, right? Let's clarify some things that went on the idea of God versus religion being two existential bodies, which is not over combined, nor is it something that's sort of similar. If you want to say from like an analogical point of view that you want to take into like the leader of opposition's way of saying one is a teacher, one is a sort of like the teaching or something like that, right? Understand that like just because you hate a maths teacher specifically does not mean you hate maths. If you hate maths, you're going to hate every single teacher that's going to teach you. That's how the narrative is, right? So with that, right, the idea of you subscribing into living God does not necessarily mean that you're an over fanatic religious person, nor does it mean that if you're not someone who subscribes to religion, does not mean that you just completely deny the existence of God or something like that, right? Which is very bizarre to start off, right? With that being said, the idea of God hates the gays or just God hating marginalized communities per se, right? I believe that this is a very interesting and convenient example that every single time government brought up from both opening and closing. In opening side, there was the idea of marginalized women, especially like let's say like an Arabic country or like somewhere conservative, where men are supposed to be more religiously fanatic, and for some reason this man is now abusing his wife, and somehow that is God's test. Understand that this is a problem that you are facing because of someone that you married, not specifically because God told him to do so, nor is it written in any scripture nor doctrine that it says if someone is abusing you, it's okay, it's fine, it's just a test that I'm giving you and you have to be better than it. Understand that our way of wanting to subscribe into saying that this is God's test is to realize that every single, like not every single, but like adversaries that you have to go through at any point of your life, instead of pointing heads towards other people around you or instead of yourself, we believe that by subscribing into the idea of saying that this is a test that I now have to overcome will put you in a mindset that will make you tenfold better in terms of trying to overcome the fact that you have this problem as a whole, right? Next is the idea of like prayer beats over hard work, which is like the idea of just praying instead of working hard to solve that solution, right? We side closing opposition subscribe to both the idea. We don't think that one is like exclusive and the other isn't and stuff like that. Understand that just because you're religious or just because you're saying that you're atoning to testing to saying that it's like God's test or some sort of a way does not mean that you're just going to sit there and be like, oh my God, my maths test is failing. This is God's test. What am I going to do now? No, instead of complaining about saying your teacher was shit, she wasn't giving like good homeworks, or like I don't understand this subject, understand that saying that this is a test that God wants me to pass and I will pass it is the way that you're going to overcome this sort of a test. I don't think why it was necessary just until the opposition whip for this clarification to come, nor does it realize that like people who are meditative or people who are just like subscribing into this narrative for some reason just give up. Like coming into the idea that who was it? Yes, Chris brought in his speech about like praying more instead of like solving the solution, or like credit card fraud, or like your dog dying is just somehow God's test and now you have to overcome it. One, extreme cases. Another two, it's convenient that on government's world, right, they have so many of these helpful beings who just the moment you tell, right, you're the problem in this relationship, that person goes, it is, I am the problem, let's solve this together. Never does it happen. Understand that in status quo, it is very common to call someone else out, even if the problem relies in yourself. This is humanity at its finest. And understandably, Siho has made a very clarified case on why in status quo, people are the way that we are, the way that, yeah, we are, and the urgency on why we think subscribing into the narrative that saying that it is a test of God and trying to atone to it, it will give you a better regards. We're not saying that the moment that like, oh, you think that your dog died and it's a test of God, you're gonna like immediately get another dog from God, or like you're going to adopt another puppy and for some reason that's going to like live forever. No, it might die again as well. Understand that you breaking up in a relationship with your girlfriend just solely means that there is a lesson for you to take out of that, not for you to blame her or like call her a whore or just anything in that situation and for you to just dwell on that idea. Understand that on our side, we're saying that the test of God solely comes from the idea that you need to realize that the problem that you're facing is for you and you to overcome adversarially. and into the idea of like poor people have like the whole systemic issue of like poor people being poor, and then like that's a bigger test that they have, and then like rich people being rich, meaning less God. Understand to each they have their own set of problems and predicaments. You cannot say that there is a person out there that lives without not even a single person of problem. Understand that problem in this situation is subjective. One might have it bigger than the other, you know, and say score and stuff like that. And we feel like that is very interesting for government whip to say that like India's situation, especially like these gays or like LGBT people in conservative countries are not like are not being able to benefit from our side. But it's very convenient that they left out by not like giving into the narrative of saying it's a test God, by then just seeking help out, especially one, being a gay person in a conservative country, and for you to try to seek help for, bold of you to say that that's going to give you any sort of like idea or any sort of betterment in that sort of your life. You're still going to be a gay living in a conservative country, and that is that. Now on our side, at least we're giving you the idea that this is the test that you have left and you now have to overcome it. Before I move on, Megan?
Instead of blaming an entity for putting you through like problems, right? People in our world rely on themselves, also can rely on prayers and guidance from God. So what's the exclusive benefit to your side of the house?
Understand that one, before I move on to the exclusive benefit, the idea of blaming yourself is not one, self-actualization, nor is it helping you benefit from themselves. A lot of times have we seen someone on TikTok go, I'm depressed. Oh my God, what can I do? This is my problem. But understand that there is never a situation in which majority of the people try not to better themselves. Like we said, the human nature is to blame oneself or blame another and then just try to pay in that pity party, right? At least in our side, this actualization comes from putting it on a person that obviously you blame solely for the fact that it is not falling upon another human being, nor is it on yourself, making you realize that this is a problem that, you know, is solvable. Because just because like, I don't know, a maths test is hard and you failed it does not mean that it is a unsolvable test. You just had a test and you just weren't able to overcome it. Take that lesson, do your corrections, retake the test again until you pass. That is the idea that what side closing opposition wants to bring in, right? To conclude easily, we're able to bring this motion from like a realistic status quo point of view, trying to prove to you that like our side, people exist with contestment, right? Well, we're better than OG because we're idealistic that they show that government world has like helping hands, like somewhat adversarial. For OO, right, they bring a narrative that is still on the extreme side where it does not subscribe to status quo. Whereas like on the idea of CG, they assume everyone is actively religious, which is untrue. Assume that LGBT people are not religious, which is also untrue. And premises are outliers, which isn't holistic and widely applicable. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the Novice Grand Finals. Thank you everyone for the debate. We ask that all participants please leave this breakout room so that the judges can deliberate.
Cheers, everyone. 1 out of 4 teams going to win. So good luck, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks
Good
for the
debate.
debate.